All right, folks, let's get started. I'll call this meeting to order for the Polk County Board of Commissioners. It is February 21st. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Okay, do we have any comments for items not on this agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes of February 7th. Second that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up is an aid and assist presentation. We have Carrie Hammerschmidt, Jennifer Leaf, and District Attorney Aaron Felton here, and the sheriff, if you'd like to comment, but please join us up front. Jennifer and Carrie, Jennifer, Carrie, and Aaron, what have you. Well, we can bring up another chair too.
Just keep in mind, if you're going to speak, I can't hear you from back there and the microphone won't pick you up. I mean, yes, kind of, but if you're part of the presentation.
If you plan to speak, it would be nice to have you up by the microphone. Yeah. Or answer questions. So I just want to start by thanking you for being here today to present on this issue. I know there are a lot of question marks. Our OHA contract is still not finalized. There's a lot of moving parts. So I appreciate you speaking to this despite that. So, Carrie, do you want to start us off?
I'm not sure. There's so many details. The core base is that there's a lot of questions about not just changes, but the original aid and assist process under the state of Oregon and how it's been impacted by some recent changes that were legislated down from the bench that have had there's small changes with significant impacts. So the Statesman Journal, I'm going to cite that because this is from an article they published last week, did a flow chart of the basics for aid and assist. And I'm sure most people saw that already, and we made copies as well. Primarily, someone gets arrested, they are identified as potentially having a mental illness that interferes in their ability to competently participate in their trial. So they go through a process that's set up by the state of Oregon to evaluate whether they can, and if they cannot, to become brought back to restoration through a variety of means. Primary means historically has been being sent to the state hospital for restoration services, where they get medication treatment. And then when they are restored, they come back for their trial. There's only really three things that can happen. Someone can be found able, meaning they go back for their trial. They can be found never able, meaning they cannot ever participate in their trial, and there's different processes for that. What we're talking about primarily is when someone is found not able, which means they could potentially be found able. And historically, we've had up to 3 years in the hospital to restore them to competency. And that has been brought down to 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months maximum for an end of jurisdiction in which they're sent back to the community that is prosecuting for us to handle. The Oregon State Hospital restoration process, they may or may not get them on medications within that time frame. They may or may not have them on a medication that's effective, and they are still discharging them, whether that is clinically appropriate or not.
So the 3 months potentially for some of the misdemeanor.
Yeah, misdemeanor is 3 months, felony is 6 months, a violent felony is 12 months.
What I'm hearing is 3 months is not adequate time to stabilize somebody under many circumstances.
Many circumstances, and that a lot of the time what we have on misdemeanors are what we would consider mental health driven criminal offenses like criminal mischiefs or trespassing. And so a lot of times we can manage that type of offense or defendant in the community. We have really limited housing options, and that comes down to one of our key concerns is when we don't have a safe place and know where they are, It's harder to treat them. It's harder to get the medications effectively. It's more difficult to track them. And we have a lot of that travel across the water from here to Marion County.
We do have some residential treatment beds in Polk, though, correct? It's
Yes,
it's
we
just
have.
inadequate.
Yeah, we have a residential treatment facility and a residential treatment home, multiple beds, like 12, and then the home is a 5-bed. But we don't own them and we don't run them and we can't place people and they can refuse to take placements for whatever reasons that they have to justify that. And they're both residential treatment, meaning that they're basically like a boarding house with some support for habilitative care. Making sure they get fed, that they get their medications. Second to find my brain. What we did implement that's helped with a lot of our cases is we implemented the rapid access docket. The rapid access docket is something I think that started probably a decade ago with our presiding judge and other community partners in discussion about how to manage these cases before even these changes came up. And last year, we started really talking about it again. The pandemic really derailed any options to move forward in a lot of things. So we implemented that. We got together with our stakeholders. We got together with the DA, with our defense attorney groups, with our judicial partners, with the CMHP, and developed a rapid access docket in collaboration with a psychologist that is also contracted through Marion County. Basically what we do is we meet weekly and we discuss all of the aid and assist identified cases and we rapidly move them into a forensic evaluation. Sorry, I missed that key point. The way that they evaluate someone for competency is usually through a forensic evaluation, which determines are they able to competently participate in your trial.
Is that forensic evaluator, they need certain licensure from the state in order to do this work?
There's a clearance, there's a credentialing process and a specialty training for it. PsyDs might do a lot of different things. Our director is a PsyD. We have a lot of other people in the community that do PsyD work. Forensic evaluation is a specialty, and there's credentialing through the state and training. You can even have someone with an LCSW, but you really want someone that has that effective higher level training to be able to do that. And the gentleman that we've contracted with from our county is very well respected, very well presented, excellent with his work. That's Dr. Stover.
It's great news.
So we'll identify, we start with lower level offenses, so we move them out of the process more quickly or more rapidly. And he'll meet with them in jail or in the community setting, get a forensic eval, and if they're able, they go through the justice process. If they're not yet able, we work on trying to figure out what the next step. And if they're not evaluatable, which is not a real word, but I'm going with it, he may say he can't evaluate them because of their behaviors in jail, and then they would be targeted toward the state hospital. But we are trying to divert and get that assessed before they're sent, if we can, to get them out of jail and move forward in their cases. The biggest challenge for us is the change in the end of jurisdiction and the pressure to get things pushed through the CMHP in maybe roles that we're not suited for, ideally, which is the hospital will not communicate with the district attorneys or the defense attorneys. The defendant can communicate with them, but the hospital will only communicate with the CMHP, meaning that we then have to message back to the attorney group so that we're not talking out of ex parte, so that we're not having a discussion with one attorney or the other. We have to talk with both. And then we message back to the state hospital what the plan is. And that's a barrier to effective processing of these cases that I'm coming across, which is pretty significant.
So you're being asked to interface on possible criminal investigations as a CMHP. While I see, and is keeping the DA out of it, is that to protect the defendant? What's the layperson's explanation of that? I mean,
they're separate. To me, what it appears is there's a separation from the legal process and the clinical process, and the state hospital appears to be saying we're just doing the clinical process, but they're part of the legal team. But instead of participating with the legal process, they're putting the CMHP as the middleman towards communicating the clinical with the legal, which puts the CMHP in an awkward situation of having to understand both sides when I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have an MSW. I have no legal training whatsoever. So I'm trying to learn and work with my partners and understand without stepping in any devastating areas where I screw up a legal case potentially, or I say the wrong thing to the wrong person. So that's frustrating.
So for the benefit of the flow chart in front of me, what you just defined is the community mental health consultation box and essentially an intervener. And that, as you said, the go-between between the state hospital and the legal team. Which of course, as I follow the balance of the flow chart down, it's a pretty easy line to dismiss charges. So as I see that's what community members are interested in, how easy it is to run down that chart and see the dismiss charges box at the bottom. So as we move forward in this presentation, and I'll stop talking here in a second, Mr. District Attorney, but as we run through this flow chart, I want to see your interpretation of how the rest of this intervention works. Because the dismiss charges box, that's an easy pathway as far as I can see. And your team plays a role in getting them there, and not to purposely get them there, but out of frustration, perhaps, if nothing else. But I want to see how the rest of this and how we at the county and a community mental health authority actually assure that we're keeping people in the justice system so that justice is served. So I've heard your frustrations about that's not your training, but I want to see your interpretation of the rest of it. Sorry.
And I will say that they place this in one location, which you say right below the not able box, which is, I said, that's where the primary, there's actually a CRE or community consultation findings report that also goes up in this mid tier. That's where the judge can they order a forensic eval. They also order a community restoration eval saying, can you manage this person in the community? So we submit a report to the state and to the court and the forensic evaluator, and those may come one after the other in whatever order. When we only try to have staff involved in this process that have some forensic interest, some forensic training, we try to make sure that they have that competency, and community safety is a huge concern for our agency. We've been working as a safety net provider for a very long time as the outpatient provider, and there's limited things we can do as an outpatient. So the people that we do have that are involved in doing the community restoration evaluations are very involved with our justice system, with our corrections department. So their recommendations are defaulting towards more around community safety, sort of like what we do with jail is someone a risk or are they safe? Rather than focusing just on the clinical picture of, oh, this person could get better. When I worked in prison, they called me, it was chocolate hearted, or it would melt in your hands. I'm really aware that our community is concerned about safety, in addition to helping people restore and people get well. So you really have to balance that. So they may come in and do a community restoration process that gets ordered. And that process is ordered by the judicial branch, not the community. We make recommendations saying we can or we cannot provide services in the community safely and effectively. If we say we can't do it safely and effectively, then they want to know where they can go. And that's where we come into these residential placements. We provide treatment, but someone has to be willing to participate in treatment. The residential treatment programs offer treatment depending on what they have available. We've been utilizing 2 programs in the Portland area that specifically work with aid and assist cases. And we still provide the legal skills by video because they really only provide a certain level of treatment. I don't think that we've ever been involved in recommending, we don't recommend charges or anything having to do with that. We only ever recommend if we can support them in the acting, like they have a place to live, they're engaged in treatment, they're open to treatment, they're open to taking meds, and then we say we could serve them in the community. And then we have to work with our judicial partners and legal teams to see if they feel it's a safe person to have in the community. It's a balance. We never toss the ball and say, here's what we concretely say. We want to take those opinions and measures into account.
And again, the courts make that determination of who is safe in the community, who is not.
And that's written into the legislation too, that based on a risk to community as well as mental health status when they're making recommendations. We just can't keep them in the hospital anymore.
Yeah. So that transition from having 3 years potentially to restore somebody to 3 months, 6 months, 9 months,
Well,
12, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you just describe a bit, either of you, on how those limitations, obviously this is a court order, this is not something we can negotiate. How that has affected your ability, both as a clinical person and also as a, how does that manifest in your work?
Well, I've been quiet because Carrie is doing a really, really good job in describing the situation we're in. And I think having multiple voices, I always call it so many cooks in the kitchen, doesn't help, but she's providing very clear and focused testimony to you this morning as to the situation. And Carrie has really been a person in the field, both in the process and the substance of what is going on. And also this flow chart, which I'm glad she thought of copying for you, because I did see it in the Statesman article, which I thought was a good article in terms of reporting the situation, certainly in both our counties. I think I may share it on my Facebook because I think everyone should know what's going on. And I think that I was interviewed and quoted about it being one of the most profound situations I've faced in my career. So I want to talk a bit about and answer your question, Commissioner, of course. And I want to give substantive testimony today and not just talk kind of, because often these meetings can turn into a session of I want to choose my words carefully, of sort of lamenting where we are rather than talking about solutions. But at the same time, we in these positions, I often call it the committee of the somebodies who need to do something that reflects people who say somebody should do something about this. And that is often the people in this room. And very much we are engaged in that. I want to just talk back. Carrie talked about, we began these conversations some 10 years ago and led up to the rapid docking. We really, really did. And I have clear memory of when I first talked this job that I would get asked, well, what are you going to do about mental health issues? And I didn't have a lot of answers other than to say that the mental health and criminal justice system didn't play well together. And we didn't have many options. And so one of the options was, how can we make this work better in terms of folks who need to go to the state hospital? It takes a long time and it's frustrating. Can we get our own process locally? Can we get our own doc somehow? And even though it took a long time, pandemic aside, et cetera, we are finally here. So to the extent it works on, I would say, the bandwidth of misdemeanor, lower end felony folks, it really is an effective, practical solution. I think that a lot of credit to community partners in this sense. I use that word intentionally because a partnership means you share the profits and the losses when you gather together. I think the word partnership gets thrown around a lot and doesn't always adequately describe who's involved. But in this case, in that group, it is a very effective means of addressing some challenging challenging issues. So I do want to, as we discuss these issues, hold that out as a very practical and effective approach to an issue, because it does bring together a group of professionals who can talk openly about these cases. And having attended that, and we do have my office does designate a prosecutor to those meetings and those prosecutions and those cases, much like Marion County does, because that's an effective means of following through with those cases and being involved with them on a regular basis. Every person involved, even though they have their own sort of specialty and emphasis in that process, has been engaged and concerned about community safety, advocacy, for the individual, advocacy for victims, and advocacy for law enforcement and the entire process. So I just put that out there. It is a very multidisciplinary conversation engaged in all of those topics. But to your question, Commissioner, how has this shortened time frame for end of jurisdiction affected what we're doing? Radically. We go into these decisions in referring some of the state hospital initially with the idea we would have this length of time. And every one of those days is critical to perhaps someone regaining competency. Now we have individuals coming back who are not yet competent. And some of them, as Carrie has said, we may be able to be set up to deal with someone who is committed with a criminal trespass or a criminal mischief, someone like was presenting on that level of crime. And I would say my office does not necessarily oppose dismissal in every single case. If you have someone who we can deal with in the community or a community restoration or something like that, we do oppose it in other cases. In fact, we have gone to court several times to oppose a motion to dismiss from defense in a number of cases. Our posture then is that we believe the statute that covers this provides the court with several options. What we have created in my office is that we are going to approach this with a coherent, cohesive policy and practice in approaching these cases. But it's going to be sophisticated in the sense that it's just not going to be a reaction that we're going to oppose every single time a motion to dismiss. It's case dependent. But we think that there are options for the court. And what the court does, and I do agree, the court does consider community safety and the needs of the individual in making its decision, but the court has a role. But my office has a role as an advocate to argue for what we think the best option is for the community and the safety of the community, because ultimately that is probably way up there in terms of what my priority is. But we also have a multidisciplinary approach. We have to consider the needs of the victim and also the needs of the offender too. That is part of the role of the prosecutor. We just don't come in and advocate as opposed to a defense attorney who has one solo role, which zealously advocate for the interests of their client. It's a different role than my office and my prosecutor has. So we believe, and I have told my prosecutors, our role is to mine that statute, the 370 statute, to find what the best option is. And that may be, to community restoration. It may be a high level of conditional release for that individual. It may be that we oppose the evaluation and seek a contested aid and assist hearing, something like that. So that's what we've done. And we've argued in court successfully several times that it should not be dismissed. So that is the role of the district attorney, as well as participating in the RAD doc and working through these different options. But to your question again, Commissioner, it changes the equation radically. And again, my filter is that the federal judge, in issuing an order that addressed every case, every county, I believe I'm always not there. I am always unlikely to criticize, and but I think it was short-sighted. And it was drafted as though all counties are equal, all jurisdictions are equal. We are not, and that is the problem. We are not in the same place in terms of resources other counties are. We are much better than some, but to allow a lever to go in and perhaps present local facts, individual cases, to perhaps have an opt-out, present that to a magistrate or something like that is very challenging. And that is the problem I have with it. And I think that my issue with OHA, in addition to the sort of lockdown information, I was personally kicked out of a Zoom meeting the other day at the OHA because I just wanted to get information. And I appreciate that they're getting advice from their attorneys in terms of their HIPAA obligations and all that. But these are uncertain times. And I think that given that we're losing date as every day goes by, as we're getting close to end of jurisdiction on some of these, we don't have the time not to share information. That's why I think part of this meeting and the other meetings we've had is I'm trying to be aggressively transparent and what I'm doing, so people know, and that no one is surprised about what my office, the position my office is taking on all the range of cases. And so that's why I appreciate this invitation to come before you and at least talk about some of these issues and how I filter them and the way the approach my office is taking. The options we have may not be good. Some of them may be foreclosed on some of these cases. But we are again aggressively mining the options that we have to move forward in the interest of the community. And I appreciate the work that Carrie's doing in her agency and all of folks that are involved in the RAD doc, because I think it is helping on a certain lower bandwidth of cases.
I just wanted to emphasize your point on the regionality issues and taking each community into consideration. When I read the article from Marion County and when I looked at some of the other cases coming out, we don't have the same resources that Marion County does when they were talking about putting people into this crisis respite bed and doing these services and having these units and these apartments. So I reached out to some of my ex-coworkers in Yamhill County, and everybody's trying to figure out what to do. We just can't respond in the same way. It has to be unique to our community and what our resources are. So I really appreciate that, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that lack of understanding that each community, whether it's Umatilla, whether it's Polk County, whether it's Lake, that we have different resources.
Would you say that one of the biggest gaps in our resources are residential facilities in Polk County, secure residential? I know there are big challenges to staffing these facilities, and the funding sustainability is really a question mark. But when you say Marion has resources that we don't, is that what you're kind of alluding to?
It's a larger county and they have, by definition and by the duration, I mean, they've had the state hospital in their county for a long time. Stepped down. They have more residential, not just residential, but housing units.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge for multiple levels of people in our community is the lack of affordable housing, the lack of options. But yes, in a residential treatment, it gets more complex when you start looking at, does someone need you can't put someone in a hospital level of care unless they meet a hospital level of care. So someone may not be able and also not meet hospital level of care anymore because they've started to stabilize a little bit, but they're not yet able to participate in the legal process. But now they can't stay at the hospital. And where do they go? We don't have other hospitals. We have acute care settings. I don't know how many beds we have for subacute, which just means right below the hospital. Not very many. And they're like, there's a little program up in Multnomah County. So it's residential and hospital. Where's this in between where we have that ability? So community restoration, and we're doing amazing work together as community partners and stakeholders to try to identify and work with our lower offenses and people that we feel can be served that way. Yes, we don't have places for people to go, whether it's a secure, whether it's a residential treatment that we're able to manage, whether it's an apartment for someone to have a place where we know where they are, whether it's even shelter. We really lack in that area.
And that lack of housing prevents restoration, because without that, it's tough to get people stabilized, but it's also a public safety issue because we don't know where people are if they don't have an address. Is that safe to say?
From my biased perspective as a social worker, I would have to say that that's my opinion.
It just seems kind of evident to me, but
Not only lack of housing, but also lack of a clinical setting. That if you're still somebody's on a restoration path, that's a highly complex process that requires a hospital level setting with very highly trained professionals involved in that. You simply cannot shift them to a different location, to a different environment, and continue. I'm just a lawyer, but a lot of this was created by lawyers and non-medical people. And so, but yet here we are. And I can't just help but think that shift to a different environment that is not done in a medical environment is challenging going forward. And I'm not a healthcare professional. Yet again, these decisions are being made, are being required to be made by non-medical people, non-trained healthcare and mental health care, behavioral healthcare professionals like prosecutors, and I now I'm starting to get into my filter, which I did not intend this to be. You asked for substantive information. So
An open conversation.
I appreciate that, Commissioner, but I don't want to veer off the path in terms of my concerns about going forward and the risks created by these shortened timeframes. And what is requiring OHA to do. And ultimately, more in my concern, Polk County people, Polk County community members to potentially.
Well, I do appreciate the integration of these various systems in Polk County through the rapid access docket program particularly. I think that's a shining star and something we should be proud of. I'm encouraged that the state hospital, despite their many years of inadequate service, is attempting to expand beds and also to not put it squarely on communities. But it's clear to me that as a community, as a region, we need to expand some capacities here too in response. But hopefully those talks will continue. Any questions from the commissioners? Lyle?
Well, Carrie and Aaron, thank you so much for your presentation today. And I know they answered a lot of the questions I was hoping we get out to the public. Aaron, can you expand a little bit on options? I know I don't want to get real deep, but if you can give us an idea of some of the options that you may have in facing some of these criminals that come out. And I'm not worried about the misdemeanors of the type C, but the Measure 11 offenders. That's what I get questioned about the most. So if you give us some options on that when we are faced with their release at the end of the 1 year.
Well, it really, Commissioner, thank you for the question. It really depends on the offender, where they are in their process. Generally, to this point, when we have had individuals at violent offenders or felony offenders who are at that process, they've come to us at a restored to competency. So we're sort of in uncharted territory where we're facing the potential of individuals who have not yet been restored to competency. But let's, say we would have an individual who did come to us restored to competency. That's a fairly traditional path, which means we would try the case and seek a criminal justice outcome based on a traditional prosecution, which may be guilty, acquittal, or a guilty acceptance sane, something like that. But we try the case. Someone who comes to us potentially now who has not yet gained competency, that's more challenging for us. And I'm looking at the screen, and that's awkward, but that would be someone who has not yet gained competency. Then we have options of, can they continue to be restored in the community? Do we have options? Can they receive medical treatment to be restored to competency? Where could that be? Is there a secure treatment facility? We would work with behavioral health, try and find perhaps a secure treatment or secured residential treatment facility for them. And it would depend on the individual. What's their risk level? Is there a conditional release that could be established? We would have to explore those options. Another option is the EDP, the Extremely Dangerous Person Statute, which is a lower level option of someone then we would have to have them declared an extremely dangerous person. And that involves then being put in the jurisdiction of the PSRB, the Psychiatric Security Review Board. That's a whole different ballgame of then they would have jurisdiction of them for up to 24 months. They could be released from their custody in less than that time. I'm not as comfortable with that option, but depending on the person, that is an option. In some cases, we could look at perhaps having them committed as a danger to themselves or others. A civil commitment process is another option for those individuals. So when I talk about sort of looking at all the options, under the statute, those are just a few of the options in front of us. And depending on the individual, we would look at those options. Obviously, as Commissioner Pope brought up from the very beginning, dismissal. I don't even like to use the word option, but that is also mentioned in the statute as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was a short version.
Just a short version, but I want to. I really always want to leave this topic with commissioners and folks who are listening to this with the understanding is that my office in behavioral health is not approaching this with the concept of this is terrible. We don't know what to do. We're just wringing our hands. We are forming active plans to address this. We're working with our community partners to approach this with the resources that we have, to take this head on in the interest of community safety and finding options and taking those options and moving ahead with them so that we can do the best we can with the options that we have. And we feel good. I feel good with the team that we have. And so I really, really want to leave you with that. We're not just sitting there on our hands going, woe is us. We are going to move ahead in a proactive manner on these cases, and we are.
Thank you. Anything else?
Oh, yes.
Please.
So first, thank you both for your presentation so far. I heard you say solutions several times. I would hope that you would change that term to tools.
I will.
Thank
Sure.
you, because they're not solutions.
You're right. You're right, Commissioner.
Commissioner Gordon, you said shining star with regard to the rapid aid docket. Based on what evidence?
Well, our ability to process cases and the partnerships formed around that and our ability to secure a forensic evaluator, which is one of the biggest deficiencies across the state. So we've responded. Excuse me?
Evidence is where? You said it's a shining star. So I've asked this question before. I want to better understand it. So I need to know the evidence for the rapid aid docket. It's a new tool.
You mean the percentage of people restored that?
I just need to see the evidence. You said it's a shining star. I want to see the evidence. Okay, bring me the receipts so I can embrace it.
Well, so I'm looking at it as a system, right, in
Yeah.
place.
And
Is the evidence you're looking for the percentage of people who are restored and then processed through the system?
perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Are we tracking
But I think
that?
that objective opinion, and it's an opinion, has to come from the professionals that are working in that field. And I want to understand the evidence for a statement like that. And because I think your statement is anecdotal and that's fine, but I want to understand, I'm being asked to embrace a rapid docket program and it's a shining star. Okay. Based on how do I tell the person on the street what that means? That also goes to my concerns about what is the definition of community restoration? Because that is a piece we've talked about a lot here, but for folks that might be watching this meeting and listening in, I'm confident they're asking, what does that mean? So is that a clinical definition that perhaps the judicial system can take a more subjective view of? And is it something that at courts actually it's a definition they could say, yep, it's absolutely a definition that we can stand behind? And you don't have to answer me right now. I'm just putting those out there. Those are concerns and questions that I have that I think we need to make certain that we're speaking in a language to our constituents that help them have confidence that what we're talking about is the right pathway. I mean, clearly there's a huge problem here with the state shifting everything. And you've acknowledged that at the beginning of your statements, Gary. So, and that's where my concern is as well. And you've also touched on my concerns about the operational capability of any county, not just Polk County, but of any county being able to take on these responsibilities for more community restoration, more facilities, whether they be secure residential or just residential treatment facilities. We haven't touched on any of the concerns we have, and we do have them here about us taking on the role of the state still being in charge of everything and dictating to us where we can place people, which is currently where we're at as well. So those are challenges that stick with me on some of these things as we go forward. And then finally, I would say this chart, I also saw it as well and printed it and kept it through the media. And the thing that I find missing in here for the definition to the public is statutory timelines. So if you folks have connections or yourselves can help us, it makes it a much more complex chart, but there are statutory timelines required in here. So this isn't an ongoing, you can go forever in the community restoration process. So there's timelines you have to meet
And
by
that's
law.
That's a good point. I do think that it is at least an introductory flow chart for someone who's never heard of this before. So I think someone who's just fluent into this, and I think that you got to have 1, 2, 3 hits on a person before they go, I get it. So this was a good beginning point for someone who's just cluing into what's going on. So I think you're right, Commissioner. Timeframes, probably some more information on something like that would be more comprehensive. I would like to touch upon your question about rapid docs. My filter on that, why I think it is a positive step forward because I get frustrated with conventionality and what I just consider bureaucratic stuff in our court system about things that cause delay and unnecessary ceremony that cuts down people being able to communicate and move things through the system. Nothing gets better with age. I get frustrated with cases that get continued out. I set up an motion to continue this morning, got a case file set up for another few months. It happens all the time. I know why, I get it, but it still frustrates me. So anytime you get all the parties together around the table and can just talk and cut through the red tape, the mess, and I have to keep coming back for a hearing after hearing after hearing. And we all know what it's like to schedule lawyers' calendars or any professional's calendars, and your calendars too. Any professional, it's a nightmare to get everybody together. This is everybody together on a weekly basis and just makes it happen. And so if nothing else, that moves the process forward. So I think that's a good piece. And because everyone signs off on the waivers, they can actually talk about the case in real time. So I would say that may not be sort of the criteria in terms of the receipts, which I like that. But that is in terms of the process. To me, that is a successful program. And things actually get decided because we have hearings open to the public after that point, and there are deadlines and things move forward. You don't have to send out someone to the state hospital and then wonder why are they back, what's happening, all that kind of stuff. Even though the state hospital is the right place for some people to receive actual treatment, it's sort of the wrong place in terms of keeping the case moving, especially at a misdemeanor or lower felony level, especially when we have a doc in-house that can make those decisions and help with that process. So I think from a practical standpoint, that is a successful process. So I'm going to give you, that's my feedback on that question. May not answer another part of your question, but I wanted to give you my filter from that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And again, I would hope that before too long, we will have some data that actually says, but not for this program, we would have had more people stalled in the system based on these cases or the numbers of cases, not specific cases, but I just want to see those data points to understand how this is working and why it's the right way to go, because there is an element here of eventually this kind of system will force decision makers to lean into other expenses, other spending that supports it. And so, and I do appreciate your statement about this flow chart, and it is a great chart for somebody to get started. It took me 5 minutes to absorb it and then started having questions. So I'm in a different place than the general public. And I want to know more. I want to learn more about all of these touch points, all of these timelines and conditions, because it influences my ability to make a decision about how we invest in things.
But I tell you, Commissioner, if you're seeing it asking questions, if a member of the public is seeing it asking questions, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good article if it's touching a member of the public and asking questions about this crisis.
Mhm.
So, yes, sir.
I wish we had simple answers, like if there was just a way to get to an answer and simmer it down and say, this is the result. A lot of the questions bring up more questions. A lot of the answers bring up more questions. And so I can answer the what is community restoration. It's one of many pieces that can happen in that process. But that is identified under the ORS, which is it's actually a set of services. It's not even it's a standalone process. Community restoration is taking someone in the community, simply meaning not in an institutional setting. So that means if they're in jail or they're in the Oregon State Hospital, they are not in community restoration. So if they're in the community, and that can be a secure residential treatment facility, a residential treatment facility, living on the streets, living in an apartment, any of that's considered in the community because it's not an institution. And in that process, the court determines that the defendant lacks fitness to proceed. The criminal proceedings against the defendant shall be suspended, and the court determines an appropriate action in the case. The court enters the judgment, and it could be community restoration. And that means that we do treatment, housing searches, medication management, legal skills training. There's a whole set of things that they've newly expanded on what the CMHP is required to do during community restoration. So that goes to our team members that are more trained within forensics and specializing in that area to be able to work with people that are defendants as well as mentally ill so that they can try to get them well with that in alignment.
Thank you. So what you just defined is a resource base, not an outcome base.
That's a resource base for rapid access with the concrete. What we do is, Frankie Hopi is our specialty courts coordinator for drug court, for the rapid access docket and for the new family court that they're implementing. And I believe that she's starting to track and get the data. We're still pretty new. So a lot of the cases that we've been working with, a lot of the scenarios that we've been working with are in process because this really just started getting ramped up. And since cases can take a lot of time, the rapid ability to go in and say, yes, this is a low level offender. This was someone who's basically misusing 911 or someone that's like hanging out at the store that comes in over and over and over and over again. Can we get them away from this behavior through mental health treatment, through a adult foster placement, through something else? And we've been able to do that. We've also brought in our IDD, our developmental disabilities. We've gotten an individual placed in an appropriate developmental disabilities home. It was outside of the community because they have a network of homes as well. And out of this process, they're still involved in our court process, but they're being supported. They're in a safe environment, and we can continue with the cases. The judicial system treatment is getting them where they need to be when we have the resource. We were able to contract with Dr. Stover through grant funds from the state. And then the defense is actually responsible for paying for his actual costs. So that one's kind of a nice piece. That's how we got that contract in the first place. We're able to communicate. And I think I was talking to Mr. Gordon earlier about, I talked to the hospital and then I talked to the attorneys and then I go back and talk to the hospital, and that's like playing telephone, right? I'm not getting that. With rapid access docket, we don't have that. We get to have an immediate decision. We get to move forward. We get to have all the parties. We can invite Northwest Seniors and Disabilities, and if it's an older person or someone who has a neurocognitive, we're utilizing any resources that we have, and we do it more rapidly. I will work with Frankie and see about getting you some concrete data on the numbers that we're processing, how many forensic evals that we've done. Dr. Stover mentioned in our rapid access meeting a few weeks ago that the psychologists at the hospital can do about 3 or 4 a week of the forensic evals. If you took 4 or 5 a week and then you divided that into the population of people in the aid and assist population at the state hospital, how many forensic evaluators do we need on hand and on staff? And that just is an indication of why having access to someone that we can use for 2 or 3, 2 a week is incredible. There just aren't there's not the availability for that. So I would hate to That is one thing I would hate to lose, is the ability to have that contract.
In the absence of that rapid access docket meeting, those communications would have to happen
You'd be going,
staggered and
yeah, you'd be going through this process of they go through the court. We'd send a CCFR. My staff would be in there independently. And then they would be in the jail, and the defense attorney would have to contract for the forensic evaluators and try to get someone outside, and the wait list for those are 6 to 8 weeks, I believe is what we've been running into. Which is why we still have some people that aren't appropriate for our forensic evaluator, is the defense counsel's contracting, and they're sitting in jail waiting for those outside. Every case would be in that situation where we wouldn't have that 7-day requirement to get them into the state hospital. It would be 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And because we're so small, it stacks up exponentially to have that many cases waiting when we can get 2 evaluated in that week. So I can get you those numbers on how many that we've actually had evaluated by our in-house, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know that I want you to go to a lot of extreme measures to get that data. I mean, if it isn't something that you use on a regular basis and it isn't in front of you, that's a concern for me, but I don't want you to go dredge that up. Because again, it also needs to be in a way that can speak to the layperson and actually show outcomes. And then finally, and I do absolutely appreciate you guys being involved here and having these conversations. I've been here quite a while, and this is the first time we've had this conversation in my time. And I think it's important that we have a better understanding together about all of the pain points in the justice system and our behavioral health system. And so this is progress. We're moving in the right direction. So finally, I leave you all with the question of, if the state wasn't trying to force you into a corner, and because right now all of you are playing a catch-up or defensive role in this process. If you're all very smart people, very skilled, very capable, you know what your landscape looks like. If you had the privilege or the authority to design a system that was good for Polk County, I don't want an answer. I just want you to think about this. What would it look like? How would it differ from what we're currently being forced to do? And again, you're playing defense because you're not ready for so many of these things that are being pushed, and you're not actually even being asked. I'm editorializing here, but you're not actually being asked. You're just being told this is what you're going to get. And there will be constraints on it that make it, from my point of view, make it very difficult to make it the best benefit for the communities that you're serving. So I would like us to have a real conversation about if we had a choice to do certain things here and have it data driven, outcome driven, what would we do differently? Thank you for that opportunity.
I appreciate you being here today. And I just want to say that I did invite Judge Hill to join us today as well. He couldn't spare any staff, or other judges weren't available, but he is willing to speak with any of the commissioners at any time about their role in the process. I hope this is the start of a conversation. Perhaps we can talk about future topics to cover. I don't want to waste your time, but it's clearly a subject of our interest and the public's interest. So I really appreciate your response to the challenges. I'm incredibly impressed by the collaboration. There are some gaps in our systems are kind of rising to the surface here, particularly in our treatment facility and housing. But very much appreciate all your efforts.
I appreciate the opportunity. I think all of us in the collective public safety system appreciate these opportunities. I speak for me is that, especially again, since the commission is elected to have these meetings public and available online for our community. I think it's a valuable asset that we are able to have these conversations in this, I think, very low key, very non-confrontational way, very productive way, so people can hear about it. Hopefully, to stimulate perhaps questions online or other people coming to the meetings, other members of the public participate in it, because people got to know. People need to know what's happening. And like I said, we all have our filter in it. I can spend this whole time with my laundry list of my complaints, but that's not productive. It's not to blame session, but I welcome the opportunity to come because the questions from this commission are always thought-provoking. I've always felt support from this commission in terms of my role in public safety, because I think it always boils down to what people ask, especially in this topic, is what are you doing to keep me and my family safe? But what also are you doing for those who are committing these crimes, either to, in this population, either help them or hold them accountable at the end of the day? And there's very simple questions people in Polk County have asked because they're pretty smart. But it boils down to simple things, and they can take complex answers. They want to know something's being done. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're doing and be accountable for it. Thank you.
Oh. Hey. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Hey, do we have any non-listed items we need to cover?
No, sir.
All right, with that, we're adjourned. It is 9:56.